Hi, I'm Peter Dennis. I'm chairman of TTI, which is the Travel Technology Initiative. Well, I started life as the infamous travel courier, drinking a lot. And that's how it all started, really, for me, I guess, the travel industry. It's actually how I met my wife. And we kind of had some fun, doing the summertime down on the beach and then winter up in the Alps. So that's kind of where I learned to ski. From that, I went into the cruise ship industry. I worked for Fred Olsen in the very early days. And then I moved completely out of cruising and into the hotel industry. And I started life looking after travel agency business, working actually on property as well. And I progressed through the travel industry, working for several hotel groups until I ended up with Marriott, basically in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was responsible then for travel agency business, predominantly kind of in the corporate space. But what I got exposed to very early on was the idea that, the telephone as a way of making bookings was going to be challenged by this new thing that was emerging called GDS. And GDS back then was termed CRS, and those of us who are a bit older in the industry still refer to it as CRS. And I worked within a group that was looking at putting hotels onto GDS. And that was really in the early 1990s. That was a really interesting project. And from that, I then progressed up to become the interactive director for Marriott, looking at e-commerce before this thing called the internet emerged. And then actually, as the internet broke in '94, late '94, we first heard that word internet. I was then part of a very small team at Marriott who were working on the first ever Marriott.com website, which was groundbreaking back then. I mean, I can remember seeing the first little Marriott logo appearing on a computer screen for the first time ever. And it was a groundbreaking moment because prior to that, it was all black screen, green writing, in the early days of word processors. So I progressed up through my career. I stayed on at Marriott just before the .com launch. I was traveling the world, literally, doing a lot of speaking, public speaking on this new thing called the internet that people were like, not sure what this thing is called. And I actually think a very memorable moment was I was on one of the very first EasyJet flights. And EasyJet had a telephone number down the side of the plane. And I was traveling somewhere, I can't remember where, but sat next to me was this Greek guy that kind of owned EasyJet at the time. And we got talking, it was one of the first ever things. And he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work at Marriott, I'm involved in the internet." And he was like, "Yeah, we've heard of this thing called the internet, but we don't think it's anything." So it's quite funny, actually, how you think, the world has progressed. So I worked in Marriott all the way through until, as I say, just prior to the .coms. And I suddenly then realized, well, actually, I could probably make a lot more money on my own, doing this internet thing, but still passionate about travel. And I, during the .coms, got involved in a number of businesses where I thought I was never going to have to work ever again, but we kind of live and learn out of that. I came out of that, and then I set up my own consulting practice, again, looking at travel, particularly hotels, looking at e-commerce, till right up to date now, where I kind of own several businesses. I have investments in several travel businesses, and I kind of just got pushed, I think is the word, into become the chairman of TTI. And I think the reason why that happened is that throughout my e-commerce life, my professional life in the travel business, I've been passionate about standards, because being a techie guy myself, it really is all about standards. If everybody's out there trying to reinvent the wheel, it would cost millions to kind of integrate. And I learned that lesson very early on at Marriott in the early days of the internet, where I kind of was one of the original founders of the organization called Hedna, the Hotel Electronic Distribution Network Association, which now is quite a big organisation globally. We were looking at standards then in GDS, and then this thing called XML came along, and that gave birth to the Open Travel Alliance, as it was called back then, OTA, and I was kind of sitting on the board of that very early on. That's now called Open Travel. So yeah, I've always been passionate about standards, and really that's what TTI is all about, is looking at these standards within the industry that help people to connect, really, and to do business together. So that's how I got to where I am. We are a standards body, but we're a membership organisation based in the UK. But we look at the wider travel industry technology issues and standards, really. That's kind of what we do. We currently have about 200 members in the organisation, and they tend to be the large tour operators, airlines, that type of thing, particularly those that are looking at technology, because obviously technology playing a very big part. The organisation is about 20 years old. Well, in fact, just over 20 years old now. I remember speaking at TTI conference when I first got into the industry. And it's growing, which is great. I mean, as chairman, membership organisation, it's growing. And I think that bears out because technology is such an important issue in the industry today. There's three things that we look at, really. One is projects, so that tends to be around technical standards. One is about cooperation, and that's where we're looking at the wider travel industry. And I think, what a lot of people tend to forget, that the global travel industry is huge and growing very rapidly, actually. So cooperation for us is key, working with some of the industry bodies in the various different parts of travel, but also communication. And one of the things that we do, we organise 4 conferences a year, we have a newsletter, we have a website, that type of thing. And it's really just growing that, growing it. I mean, 200 members is great. I'd like to have 2,000 members, because the world is a very big place. And you tend to find there's a select few. The industry's large, but there are a select few who kind of really make things happen in this industry technologically. But now technology affects everybody in the industry, right down to the little SMEs. So that's kind of our mission for TTI. I'm enjoying it enormously, working within TTI. I get to meet a lot of key people in the industry. And I'm getting older, the grey hair, but at the end of the day, I've still got a few years yet to give to the industry. And I think that standards are not over yet. Technology is evolving at an ever-increasing pace. And actually the standards therefore become really vital. I mean, if you think about mobile, where mobile is going, and on into the network, as I call it, and I'll perhaps touch on that in a little bit, because I think that's the next generation, and we're really not too far away from that right now. So, what the customers are telling me at the moment is it's quite challenging, okay, because in a rather short space of time, I mean, if one thinks about the internet, it's really still young. It's not even 20 years old yet. It's about 18 years old, but about 10 years old in real terms. And that's been a huge shift, for people in terms of their business. I mean, if you look at the high street, just retail shops today, they're really being challenged, with this online revolution. So the move from offline, if one wants to put it to that, to the internet world, has been a huge shift and a big challenge for customers. What I find travel businesses are really challenged with now is that whereas we used to have search in the hands of professionals, in other words, travel agencies, tour operators, that type of thing, the travel agent, the tour operator was this side of the desk looking at the screen. The customer had no screen, so they had no access to search. Flip that right around to where we are today, and now the customer has the search, but actually has hundreds of opportunities to search. So that challenges, if you like, the person that was originally sitting this side of the screen, right? The travel agent or the tour operator, because the consumer is becoming wise and is actually becoming very savvy, very price conscious. They can do a tremendous amount of research on their own in terms of what they want, so that when they pin it down, they're going in saying, that's what I want. No longer is it almost the travel agent saying, well, I think you should go here. I mean, they can say that, but you know, that's a huge challenge. I think the other challenge at the moment is two things really I want to say about this challenge, because I think it's interesting. One is when I grew up, there was no such thing as a credit card. I mean, I can remember having an access card when I was about 20, but there was no real such thing as a credit card. So the world's gone into this era of credit. And it's kind of interesting because the world suddenly invented all this money, and now it's kind of like how we're going to pay back the money. So that is a challenge, if you like, to the developing world, but also to the consumer. You know, the amount of debt out there by countries, governments, businesses, individuals is huge. So, you know, people are very price savvy today, and that again poses a little bit of a challenge. They all want the deal type thing. So that's interesting. But I think the other challenge, and this is a big one for the travel industry, is the emerging markets, right, like the BRIC countries, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, but not just the BRIC countries, but also countries like Turkey, for example, or the former Eastern Bloc countries that are actually doing quite well. But just put it in perspective for a minute. I mean, out of China, next year, there will be 100 million new Chinese tourists coming out of China. So if you just got 10% of those travellers, okay, that's a lot of new business. Now, those people don't speak English, they don't eat our food, they're completely different people in terms of how they want to travel. And I think that, you know, if you look at, for example, Brand USA, I mean, you know through World Travel Market how big Brand USA's presence was at the market last year. That's partly because President Obama is seeing that actually the future is about growing tourism, because the facts and figures bear out that actually travel, in fact, is doing this. I mean, the economy might be doing this and people are worried about whether it's going to take off again, but just the sheer number of people traveling over the next 10 years is going to be huge. And businesses in the UK, tour operators, incoming specialists, have to think, how are they going to accommodate the Chinese traveller? You know, because there's a huge opportunity there, and there's a huge opportunity for jobs and everything else, really. I think it's about sustainability, okay? You know, the globe is a very fragile place, really is a fragile place. And actually, for those of us that have travelled widely, you know, the world is quite small. And, you know, again, through technology, it's become smaller. So sustainability and making sure, you know, that we don't destroy cultures with tourism. I think we have to look more closely at, you know, the green issues. I know green has kind of gone out of fashion a little bit, it seems, at the moment because of the economy, but actually it should be top of mind, in fact, in what everybody's doing. And, you know, the travel industry kind of has a responsibility to look at that and to make sure that the world is protected, but also that the consumers themselves are educated in understanding that, you know, when you go there, you're not going to get fish and chips, and neither should you get fish and chips. Yeah, it's all about preserving what the world is all about and all the different beautiful cultures that, you know, this planet has to offer, and just making sure that when we develop, we don't let the land developers go in with big concrete monolithic structures that, you know, are going to destroy the environment. So, you know, I think that's a big challenge, and, you know, I think it's a challenge for the operators, but I think it's an educational thing also for the consumer, really. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, really one of my real memorable moments in the industry was, you know, as I said, the first time we saw an icon of a Marriott thing appear on a computer screen. I mean, that was a groundbreaking moment for us, thinking, wow, this whole internet thing is going to be something else. And another groundbreaking moment, and kind of along the similar lines, I guess, was when we were doing all of the language on the Marriott site for the GDS environment, and actually room types, for example. So in GDS language, A1K meant, A being the highest letter of the alphabet meant superior, 1 meant 1 bed in the room, and K meant a king bedded room. So A1K. And the industry knew what we meant by A1K, but the public would never understand what we meant by A1K. If we published A1K on a website today, the public wouldn't know what the hell we were talking about. So I got involved in a project called Direct Connect, and that was just before, I mean, the industry talks of Direct Connect, but we did Direct Connect back in the very early days of the internet. We did it primarily to try and help travel agents, to have a full description of our room. And that just coincided with the internet happening, and that was just fortuitous, right? Because we could now fully describe the room type, to the customer. So that was good. Other sort of personal highlights, I guess, really. Yeah, when I thought I was never going to have to work again. During the dot-coms, I can remember somebody issuing to me a document with shares on it with Mickey Mouse numbers. But it was just paper, and I thought, wow, okay, that's it. I can retire. I was, I was only 30 years old, really back then. So no, 40 years old. What am I saying? See, I'm getting a bit old now. But at 40 years old, I suddenly thought, wow, I'm never gonna, have to work again. But we live and learn. Whether we'll go through another dot-com boom is kind of going to be interesting. But that was very memorable. For those going into the industry, it's a vast industry. Okay, I would say to any young people out there, get into the travel industry. Jump in any way you can, because it's so enriching. I've had the most fantastic career. If I'd have been the richest man in the world, I couldn't have had some of the experiences I've had, thanks to the travel industry. And I think, for the youngsters out there, the travel industry in my mind is made up of 4 quadrants, actually. Half are business travel, half are leisure travel. And then if you cut those quadrants again, it's all about independent travel or group travel. Okay, so there's these 4 quadrants, if you like, of the industry. So there's transient corporate, there's the MICE industry in corporate meetings, incentive, conference and events. Then there's the leisure transient area, I'm going off with my wife. And then there's this SMERF, as it's called, segment, which is social, marital, educational, religious and fraternity. And that's, I'm going off as part of a group, but it's my money. It's not my corporation's money. And if you think of the globe in terms of that, anybody traveling, when you're on a plane, somebody sat next to you is from one of those 4 quadrants. And so, think about that as young people trying to get into this industry, because tourism development is going to be huge. It's already huge, but it's going to be huge. More and more airplanes are going to fly. More and more cultural people are going to be coming to this country. So there are huge opportunities for young people, and they might just sit there and think, well, just how do I get into it? Well, I fell into it because I was drinking on a beach and somebody said, come and be a holiday courier. Oh, that sounds good. I'll do that. So I kind of fell into the industry. I didn't have a plan for it. But from there, I went all the way up, and my career kind of just took off in several places, and so it's doable. They just have to be enthusiastic. They just have to have the ability to work hard, but it's work hard, play hard. That's what this industry is all about. Work hard, play hard, passion, and looking after the world, really. I think really my most memorable place I visited was Bali, actually, in Indonesia. And one of the reasons why it was so special was, you know, coming in through the clouds on the aeroplane, and you just see these volcanic peaks around the place, and you actually think, my God, am I arriving in Jurassic Park or something like that? You know, this is kind of interesting. And then you arrive at this airport, Nurungai Airport, in Bali in Indonesia. Looks like something out of the Jungle Book, you know, where the monkeys are all swinging from the temples and things like that. And there's a serenity about that place. You know, when you arrive, you hear different birds, different insects, and the people are tiny. You know, they're like pygmy-sized people. And I just remember going to get my luggage trolley, you know, to put my luggage on it, and suddenly the luggage trolley was like a foot lower than the luggage trolleys in Heathrow, because of course people are much smaller there. So I loved Bali. I thought Bali was, you know, culturally fantastic. I thought I'd just landed in a different planet, you know, beautiful plants, beautiful people, beautiful climate. So Bali, yeah, for sure. But you know, I've travelled a lot, and I still love to holiday here in the UK. You know, I think the UK on a sunny day, you know, on a nice beach somewhere down in the southwest, you can't get better, actually. You know, I was in Padstow recently in Cornwall, and you know, the sand there is full of these tiny, you know, kind of onyx type, marbly type sand. So when the sun comes out, it's just beautiful, you know, and you sit there and you think, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the world. So, you know, the world is just a fabulous place, and the travel industry is a fabulous place.